Beware the Seventh-day Adventist prophet, Ellen White. Seventh-day Adventists claim she was a true prophet. They claim she had dreams and visions, and even talked to a mysterious young man she called her guide. They claim she had hundreds of these supernatural events, and in some of these early events, there were eyewitnesses present. Some of those eyewitnesses said she didn't breathe, or she was so rigid that people couldn't move her arms. Ellen White wrote down these dreams and visions and messages from her spirit guide. She wrote it down in books, testimonies, and letters. The Seventh-day Adventist sect teaches that her writings are to guide the remnant church through the last days of Earth's history. Seventh-day Adventists view her writings as an authoritative source of truth, though not exactly on the same par as the Bible. Whereas most Christian churches regard the Bible as the only authority, the Seventh-day Adventist Church regards the Bible as the final authority, not the only authority. Many in the sect interpret the Bible through the lens of Ellen White's writings. For example, if they want to understand the correct meaning of a passage, they'll often turn to her writings to interpret the Bible. She's viewed by some within the sect as the infallible interpreter of the Bible. They look to her for guidance, not only on spiritual subjects, but also other subjects like physical and mental health. But should we blindly accept what they say about Ellen White as if it was factual? Well, to begin, Jesus said in Matthew 7:15, "Beware of false prophets." And in Matthew 24:11, Jesus said, "In the last days many false prophets will rise up and deceive many." And in verse 25, Jesus said, "False prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect." Therefore, as a Christ follower, I must beware of false prophets. You know, Jesus never said a true prophet would come in the last days, but he definitely said many false prophets would come, and that they would deceive many. So if an SDA sect member tells me I should believe Ellen White was a true prophet, that should immediately raise red flags in my mind, because Jesus said, "Beware of false prophets, especially in the last days." Now look what the Apostle John wrote. "Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits, whether they are of God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world." John said to test the prophets. The word test is very important. It's a God-breathed word. If we disobey it, we place ourselves in peril of spiritual deception. You can't believe anyone who says they're a prophet until they've been tested or tried. Now, the Greek word for test is dokimazo, which means to examine, to prove, to scrutinize. In ancient times, this word described what people did when they received coins. They examined the coins to determine if they are real or fake. They did that because the financial stakes were high. If they sold someone 5 sheep, and if they were given 5 silver-looking coins for those sheep, and if they later discovered that was fake silver, then they'd suffer a painful loss. And if they lost so much money that they couldn't provide for their family that month, it'd be even more painful. It may impact the health, the well-being of everyone in their home. Fake coins were a big deal, so they carefully examined the coins to prove to themselves that they were legit. Likewise, if we accept someone's word that they're a true prophet when they're actually a fake prophet, we may read their writings and make changes to our life based upon what we read, thinking that it came straight from God. And those changes could seriously impact our spiritual health, our mental health, and even our physical health. Therefore, for our own safety, for the safety of our family, we can't just take someone else's word that Ellen White was a prophet. We must dokimazo. We must test. If someone says they had a dream or vision, how can we know they're even telling the truth? We aren't inside their head. We have to test. We have to hold fast to all that is good. Now, we're told Ellen White had perhaps 100 visions, primarily during her younger years. Is the only explanation for these events that God was giving her visions? Well, let's start by asking where visions can originate from. The Bible says that the devil can give people visions. For example, he took Jesus up on a mountain and showed him the splendor of the world's kingdoms. Therefore, we know the devil can give people dreams and visions, even Christians. Therefore, God is not the only source of dreams and visions. One potential source is the devil. Another source is our subconscious mind. When we eat the wrong food in the evening, it may trigger vivid dreams. A study by the British Cheese Board suggested that different types of cheese can influence dreams. For example, Stilton cheese was associated with bizarre and vivid dreams. Spicy foods, sugary foods, chocolate, turkey, nuts, and seeds have all been associated with more vivid dreams. Just because a person has a vivid religious dream doesn't prove it came from God. In addition to food, certain drugs, both recreational and pharmaceutical, are known to cause vivid dreams and even hallucinations. Throughout history and across various pagan cultures around the world, people have interpreted vivid or unusual dreams as messages from the gods. But are they? So we have two sources for vivid dreams and visions that are not from God, the devil and our own subconscious mind. So let's drill into that second one a minute. Let's talk about hallucinations. Hallucinations are fiction produced by a person's subconscious mind. You can think of it like a waking dream. Religious people who have hallucinations often falsely assume they're having visions from God. But are they visions or a delusion? Let's compare the facts of Ellen White's life with known causes of hallucinations. In her biography, Ellen White writes about getting struck in the head at age 9 by a stone thrown by another child. It even knocked her unconscious. And she wrote that she was unconscious for a period of 3 weeks. And that would indicate a severe brain injury. After that injury, she couldn't concentrate in school anymore, so by age 12, she had dropped out of school. Suffice it to say, she suffered a serious, traumatic brain injury. Neuroscientists tell us that a brain injury can potentially cause hallucinations later in life, even years after the initial injury. Traumatic brain injuries can have long-lasting and sometimes delayed effects on brain function. Brain injuries can initiate neurodegeneration, where damaged brain cells continue to deteriorate over time. This ongoing damage can eventually lead to symptoms later in life like hallucinations. Traumatic brain injury can also lead to the development of temporal lobe epilepsy. This can cause complex partial seizures which can trigger auditory and visual hallucinations. These seizures and hallucinations can appear long after the initial injury. There are documented cases of people with epilepsy and catalepsy and hysteria who had waking hallucinations. And if they happen to be highly religious people, then religion is often the subject of their hallucinations. Their mind produces themes that they love to dwell on. Some see angels. Some talk to angels or spirit guides. Some fly to heaven. Some of these experiences feel extremely real, that they can even smell flowers and other scents. To them, it's all very real. And they have these hallucinations, and then they describe them in great detail. Some predict future events, which almost always fail to happen. And by the way, I'm not talking just about Ellen White here. There are many recorded victims of head injury or temporal lobe epilepsy who've experienced visions that are merely the product of their own religious subconscious mind. Sometimes during these episodes, the victims will stop breathing. Now, they don't stop entirely. but their breathing becomes so shallow it's difficult to detect. Sometimes during these episodes, the body becomes very rigid, so rigid you can't move their arm or their leg. Did Ellen White have temporal lobe epilepsy? Well, some Seventh-day Adventist neurologists seem to think so, and some don't. You can evaluate the evidence for yourself on our website. Hopefully you're beginning to see there are other causes of waking hallucinations. What about mercury poisoning? We know that Ellen White's father was a hatter, and hatters used mercury in the production of hats. It caused what they used to call Mad Hatter's disease. As a young girl, Ellen assisted her father in his hat-making business for many years. Mercury is a potent neurotoxin. It can have significant effects on the brain and nervous system. Mercury poisoning can cause vivid, bizarre, disturbing dreams. Mercury can cause hallucinations. It can cause depression. It can even lead to religious obsession. Hallucinations, both auditory and visual, have been reported in severe cases of mercury poisoning. Were Ellen White's visions caused by her head injury, or by her exposure to mercury, or maybe a combination of both? Who knows? But I would certainly look for a rational reason for her visions first, before claiming they came from God, wouldn't you? Ellen White admits to severe episodes of depression for pretty much her entire life. And studies have shown that individuals who have sustained traumatic brain injury are at increased risk for delayed psychiatric symptoms, including depression, psychosis, and hallucinations. These conditions can emerge months or years after the injury. That's right, psychotic or psychiatric disorders can cause hallucinations. And these can be of a religious nature. I know of a man who was very religious, and one day he claimed to have visions of the future. He told people that he was one of the two witnesses of Revelation 11. None of it was true, but he believed it. You see, some psychiatric disorders can result in hallucinations. They can cause people to have grandiose delusions, such as believing oneself to be a prophet. People with manic depressive disorder sometimes have hallucinations involving themes of guilt, sin, or divine punishment. Now, what about old age? As Ellen White became elderly, she started reporting visits from a young man at night, a man whom she called her guide. Are we to take that as a fact? Elderly women experiencing dementia have reported various types of hallucinations, including visits from what they perceive as a young male spirit or a spirit guide. These imagined spirits fulfill their unmet need for companionship or guidance. Hallucinations in elderly individuals with dementia are relatively common. Seeing people that are not present is commonly reported. Hallucinations and delusions are reported in nearly 1/3 of all dementia cases. So we must examine all of the natural causes first before we claim something is supernatural. Certain drugs can induce intense and vivid dreams and hallucinations. You say, Brother Anderson, Ellen White didn't do drugs. But are you sure? Have you read our article on Ellen White's secret stash of medicinals, some of which are known to contain morphine and opium? These drugs are known to cause hallucinations. What about alcohol? Alcohol consumption can disrupt sleep patterns, leading to vivid dreams. But you say, Brother Anderson, she didn't drink alcohol. Well, have you read our article on that? Listen, I'm just saying there's many causes of hallucinations. Some of them even produce the same physical manifestations reported in some of Ellen White's visions. So let's not automatically assume her visions came from God just because they're religious in nature. To conclude this section, let's look at what can cause visual and auditory hallucinations. Traumatic brain injury. We know this happened to Ellen White. Mercury poison. We know this happened. Psychiatric disorders such as manic depression. We know she was depressed. Dementia and delirium of old age. Even drug and alcohol usage. All of these are potential causes of hallucinations and vivid dreams. And Mrs. White experienced most or all of these at some stage in her life. I suggest to you that these 5 natural causes of hallucinations should be explored, because they're much more likely and a much more natural explanation of Ellen White's so-called visions than to try to make up claims of supernatural manifestations. We shouldn't automatically assume a dream or vision came from God just because it's religious in nature. That would be reckless. We all know the Muslim prophet Muhammad claimed to have visions from God. It would be reckless, to accept them as having a divine origin. We must first evaluate whether they might have had an origin in the subconscious mind or even from the devil. And by the way, many people who were eyewitnesses to Ellen White's visions, I'm talking about people who were there in person with her, Adventists, many didn't believe that they were seeing anything supernatural at all. Even her friend Joseph Bates thought at first her visions were just a byproduct of her health condition. All right, so God commanded us to test the prophets. But what is the criteria? How do I decide if she's a true prophet or not? Someone says, well, she has many beautiful and inspiring words in her writings. That proves she was a prophet of God. Well, first I would ask, did those words come from her, or were they plagiarized from others? Did she write them herself, or did her secretaries write them? Besides, the Book of Mormon also has beautiful words. Does that prove Joseph Smith was a prophet? Of course not. Writing a beautiful or inspirational book doesn't prove a person is a prophet. They must pass the test. Listen, the more closely the false coin appears like the real coin, the more likely it'll deceive someone. The Bible provides clear guidelines on how to evaluate a prophet. I'm going to share with you 5 biblical tests of a prophet. I'm going to provide fact-based evidence showing that Ellen White failed each of these biblical tests. Let's start with number 1. Their prophecies must be fulfilled. Deuteronomy 18:22 states, when a prophet speaketh in the name of the Lord, if the thing follow not, nor come to pass, that is the thing which the Lord hath not spoken, but the prophet hath spoken it presumptuously. Thou shalt not be afraid of him. Now, a prophet doesn't have to make predictions in order to be a prophet. But if they do make predictions, all of them must come true. You see, any fake prophet can get lucky and make a vague guess about the future. And by chance, that prediction might just come to pass. For example, Joseph Smith, the Mormon prophet, predicted the American Civil War around 30 years before it started. And he even said it would start in South Carolina, which it did. That just goes to show that making a successful prediction doesn't prove a person to be a prophet. The Bible places a much more stringent test upon a prophet of God. Moses told the people, keep a scorecard. If the prophet's predictions come to pass, that's a good sign, but keep an eye on him. And if the prophet ever fails, even once, then ignore him. He's not a true prophet. Why? Well, anyone can make a lucky guess, but only God can get the future right every single time. That's what differentiates God's prophets from all the other false prophets in the world. God's true prophets are correct about the future 100% of the time. So, we're going to look at some of the specific predictions made by Ellen White, and you can judge for yourself whether they came true or not. Remember, a true prophet of God will never make a false prediction, not even one. So let's look at our first prediction, that Jesus will return in June 1845. Lucinda Burdick, a pastor's wife, a friend of Ellen Harmon, she wasn't married yet, in the 1840s, and Lucinda had many opportunities to hear Ellen's prophecies. The following is her testimony, eyewitness testimony, of a prophecy Ellen White made in one of her visions. Let's read it. During the year 1845, I met Ellen G. Harmon several times at my uncle's house in South Windham, Maine. The first of these meetings was in the month of May, when I heard her declare that God had revealed to her that Jesus Christ would return to this earth in June the next month. Ellen Harmon said God revealed it to her, that Jesus would come in June of 1845. Did this prophecy come true? No, obviously not. Second failure. She said Jesus will return in September of 1845. Mrs. Burdick testifies again. Quote, during the haying season, I again met her in company with James White at the same place and heard my uncle ask her about the failure of the Lord to return in June according to her visions. She replied that she had been told in the language of Canaan, whatever that is, which she did not understand, but that she had since come to understand that Christ would return in September at the second growth of grass instead of the first. Well, did Christ return in September of 1845? Obviously not. Now we could stop right here, knowing that according to Deuteronomy 18:22, we have nothing to fear from this prophet. She has proven to be wrong. She has proven that she doesn't speak for God. But let's give Sister White the benefit of the doubt here. The Bible warns us not to accept anything on the voice of just one witness. So let's look at another witness. Let's look at some of her own writings. Failure number 3. In 1850, Sister White wrote out what an angel supposedly told her. Quote, my accompanying angel said, time is almost finished. Get ready, get ready, get ready. Now time is almost finished. And what we have been years learning, they will have to learn in a few months. She's talking here about new converts to the SDA doctrines. And they're going to have to learn what the other Adventists learned in years. They're going to have to learn those doctrines in a few months because, quote, now time is almost finished. Now, the reduction in learning time isn't because the new converts are smarter than the old ones. It's not because the Adventists developed some accelerated learning course. The context clearly states the reason they will have to learn quickly is because time is almost finished. So, what's a reasonable definition of the phrase a few months? 3? Maybe 5? Webster's dictionary says a few is amounting to only a small number. If your friend called and said, I'm coming out to visit you in a few months, when would you expect him? 3 or 4 months, perhaps 6 at most? Well, it has now been nearly 2,100 months since Mrs. White said only a few months remained. But she was certainly saying there were not years or decades left, because she said the doctrines that earlier converts had learned in years, recent converts would have to learn in months. Clearly, this prophecy was absolutely false. Failure number 4. Mrs. White made this statement at a church conference in 1856, quote, I was shown the company present at the conference. Said the angel, some food for worms, some subjects of the 7 last plagues. Some will be alive and remain upon the earth to be translated at the coming of Jesus. Well, everyone at this conference passed away generations ago. Not a single one was alive and upon the earth to be translated at the coming of Jesus. The last living person who attended that conference, Dr. Kellogg, who was a child in 1856, he died in 1943. Therefore, none were alive and remained until the coming of Jesus. This prophecy was absolutely false. Now there are more, many more, and you can read them all on our website. But this is enough to demonstrate she made false predictions. Beware this prophet. She failed the first test. Therefore, she's not a true prophet. We can call it the end of the story right here. But if we want, we can confirm that even further by looking at the second test. The second test is they cannot have falsehoods in their visions. Jeremiah 23:32 says, Behold, I am against them that prophesy false dreams, saith the Lord, and do tell them, and cause my people to err by their lies and by their lightness. Yet I sent them not, nor commanded them. Therefore they shall not profit this people at all, saith the Lord. In the late 1840s, Ellen White's friend Joseph Bates predicted that Jesus would return in 1851. He taught that a 7-year period that had started in 1844 would end in the fall of 1851 with the return of Christ. He said those who accepted the Sabbath during these 7 years, those people would receive the seal of God. And he referred to this period as the sealing time, when people receive the seal of God in their forehead. And James and Ellen White, they were friends with Joseph Bates. They bought into this false teaching. And they started teaching it themselves. And in 1849, Mrs. White saw, quote, in vision, unquote, that the people of God were in the midst of the sealing time. After 1851 came and went, the Whites had no choice but to abandon Bates' false teaching, and nothing more was said about this sealing time being in progress. Why? Because Ellen White's vision was obviously in error. Then in 1911, when Ellen White published her epic book, Great Controversy, in that book she wrote that the sealing time was yet future. It wasn't going to happen until the final test was brought upon the world, which hasn't been brought even yet. So how could both of these be correct? In one vision, we're told the sealing time was active in the 1840s, but in 1911, she writes that it's yet future. The first vision was obviously in error. Now, there are many more examples of falsehoods in her visions, so please visit our website to see more. But this one is sufficient evidence to prove she failed the second test. So let's move on to the third. The third test is they cannot steal their writings from others. Let's look at Jeremiah 23:25 and verse 30. I have not sent these prophets, yet they ran. I have not spoken to them, yet they prophesied. Therefore, behold, I am against the prophets, saith the Lord, that steal my words, every one from his neighbor. Researchers have found that Ellen White copied the words of others into many of her books. In some books, over 50% of the words were taken from other authors. And that's according to some Adventist scholars, not me. Nearly every book or article she wrote after the church was formed has copied material. Research is ongoing on this, but it appears she stole the majority of her writings from others. So for more on this, listen to our video, The Echoing Prophet, or visit our website. Okay, obviously she did steal from others, so she failed this test. Let's move on, though, to the fourth test, which is a prophet cannot contradict the word of God. Isaiah 8:20 says, To the law and the testimony, if they speak not according to this word, it is because there is no light in them. Let's look at one example where Ellen White contradicts the Bible. The question is, did Satan deceive Adam? Look at what Ellen White wrote. In Evangelism, page 598, Satan, who is the father of lies, deceived Adam in a similar way, telling him that he need not obey God and that he would not die if he transgressed the law. Next quote from Review and Herald. Adam believed the lie of Satan. Next quote from the Spirit of Prophecy. Eve yielded to temptation, and through her influence, Adam also was deceived. Multiple times she wrote that Adam was deceived. Well, what does the Bible say? The story in Genesis chapter 3, verses 12 and 13 says Eve was deceived by the serpent, but never says anything about Adam being deceived. And look at what Paul wrote in his Spirit-breathed words. And Adam was not the one deceived. It was the woman who was deceived and became a sinner. So we can see that Ellen White directly contradicts the Bible. And there are dozens more examples. Visit our website to see more. Okay, so far she's failed the first 4 tests. The 5th test is about having good fruits. Jesus said, "Beware of false prophets. You shall know them by their fruits." SDA's claim, Ellen White produced good fruit. After all, some people read her books and then joined the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And to a Seventh-day Adventist, that's good fruit. But when we're examining a tree for fruit, we have to take into consideration all the fruit. Let's face it, the Seventh-day Adventist Church is not a healthy church. By their own reporting, half the people who joined the church are leaving nowadays. Many of them leave when they found out that Ellen White was a false prophet. So a huge turnover rate is a sign of a sick church. The fruit of her legacy is a sick church. This sect also has a warped sense of mission. While most Christian churches spend their efforts trying to convert lost souls to Christ, Seventh-day Adventists spend most of their time and effort trying to convert other Christians to join the SDA sect. Instead of seeking and saving the lost, they're seeking out other Christians. Because that's the mission Ellen White gave them. Look at what she wrote in 1907. God calls upon us to make known to all men the truths that have made us what we are, Seventh-day Adventists. She's not telling them to go preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. She's telling them to preach Seventh-day Adventism, the 3 angels' messages. Well, what so-called truths make Seventh-day Adventists who they are? Well, there's several distinctive teachings that set them apart. For example, their teachings about the investigative judgment, or that Christ changed his location up in heaven in 1844, or that the Sabbath is the seal of God and Sunday's the mark of the beast, or that there's some secret conspiracy taking place behind closed doors where people are planning to force every Seventh-day Adventist to worship on Sunday or else face a death penalty. Ellen White even said that the health message was part of their message that they need to tell everyone. The health message about how God wants people to be vegan or vegetarian. You can read all about these false doctrines on our website. So she encouraged her people to spend their time and effort trying to convince other Christians to adopt these false, unbiblical, and downright ridiculous doctrines. If that's not bad fruit, I don't know what is. In addition to that, Ellen White added a bunch of rules and regulations to the Bible. And I would say few, if any, Adventists keep these commandments. For example, she wrote against attending the theater. She wrote against sexual fulfillment in marriage. I'm talking about marital excess. Visit our website if you want to find out what that means. She wrote against children playing sports. She wrote against eating meat or having even a single glass of wine. She wrote against using dairy products. She wrote against picnics. She wrote against virtually everything that makes life enjoyable. Instead of enjoying the life God gave them. She chided her followers to spend their time and money spreading Seventh-day Adventist false doctrines. It's no wonder that they're called Sadventists. Most people who joined the church and later left will tell you it was the saddest, darkest period of their life. I know for me it was. Trying to avoid everything fun in life while at the same time trying to argue with my coworkers why they should become vegetarian or why they should believe there's some secret conspiracy of National Sunday Law. It was a miserable experience. It was worse than a waste of time. It was bad fruit. In addition, her visions misled people. She taught from her visions that Jesus was going to return in the 1840s or 1850s. That deceived and misled people. Some made life-altering decisions based on her false prophecies. And when Jesus didn't return as expected, it ended up ruining their lives. Some lost faith, some suffered financial loss. That's bad fruit. Her early writings also tend toward legalism, judgmentalism, perfectionism, all bad fruit. Now, let me give you a specific example. She wrote the following, and this is a restriction about not using drugs from her testimonies. Quote, "You should avoid the use of drugs and carefully observe the laws of health. Drugging should be forever abandoned. For while it does not cure any malady, it enfeebles the system, making it more susceptible to disease." In one of her other books, she calls quinine a poison. Now, back in her time, quinine was the only known treatment for malaria. That's right. It was the only thing that worked. If you got malaria and took quinine, you had a good chance of recovery. If you didn't take quinine, you had a good chance of dying. When Seventh-day Adventist missionaries went to Africa, some of those missionaries regarded her writings as inspired by God. So they refused to take quinine. And a number of Adventist missionaries actually died. That's one of the fruits of false teachings. People who shouldn't die, die. That's bad fruit. Her son, W.C. White, wrote the following in a letter. Quote, "One time while we were in Australia, a brother who had been acting as a missionary in the islands told mother of the sickness and death of his firstborn son." How sad. He was seriously afflicted with malaria, and his father was advised to give him quinine, but in view of the counsel and the testimonies to avoid the use of quinine, he refused to administer it, and his son died. What a tragedy. And this wasn't the only incident where someone died because they followed her testimonies. Look at what Dr. Gregory Hunt wrote. Quote, "A row of graves in Africa marked the site of the first SDA missionaries. They were told by authorities to take quinine, but as Adventists, they got their marching orders from a higher source. They knew that quinine was valueless. They trusted Mrs. White that she had been shown this by God, and as a result, they died." Listen, this woman wasn't just wrong. She was dead wrong. She failed the 5th test. She failed all 5 of these biblical tests. There is convincing and overwhelming evidence she was a false prophet. I leave you with these final words about Ellen White. Beware this prophet.